Welcome to the Hardwood Time Capsule podcast presented by Callaway Golf. Our platform brings you, the Hoops fan, deep inside the playing careers and personal lives of past players and coaches in Australian basketball. From World Championships to Olympics to the adversity of careers cut short, we explore it all direct with the players themselves. I'm John Casey. Here's your host, Andrew O'Brien.
G'day Hoops fans, welcome back to the podcast. This episode we have a 17-season veteran who played across 5 teams in the NBL, a Best Sixth Man of the Year award winner, 2-time NBL champion, and one of the most intelligent players to play the forward position ever in the league. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Stephen Hoare.
Stephen Hoare, how you going, mate?
Yes, well, thank you. Yourself?
Good, thanks. Appreciate you making the time to come on today.
No problem.
We're going to
Thanks
have...
for having me.
No, it's a absolute honour, and I know a lot of the listeners are looking forward to this one in particular. Obviously, it played across quite a few clubs, mostly for my mighty Melbourne Tigers, which is go back through. But as we always start all of our episodes on the podcast, a lot of the fans, I guess, like to know what happened to their stars they enjoyed watching. So maybe give us an update on sort of what you're up to these days, what you do for work, and where we find you in the world.
Yeah, thanks. So these days I work for Latrobe Financial. I've been here for just under 6 years now. Current role is I'm a BDM, or a client partnership manager. So my clients are mortgage brokers. So I'd go out and visit the brokers and make sure that they know when they're looking to submit deals, they know how to and when to submit to us. So I've been doing that for almost 4 years now. I have 2 kids, 15-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old. So I'm a little bit involved with the basketball with his team, coaching his under-12 team. My daughter did play a little bit of basketball, but doesn't anymore. She plays a bit of netball, but I don't get involved too much with the netball. Just a spectator only. That's about it. I did do some different bits of coaching at different times, sort of senior level, but just found I was a bit too busy with my kids growing up and work, and I didn't want to miss their stuff, so I sort of gave that away for now.
Yeah, fantastic. So we know that you went on and did some coaching in the Siebel with Sandy and around the competition there. Is that something you would be open to going back into, I guess, later in life when the kids are growing up?
Yeah, potentially. I do. I mean, I do miss it. I miss, there's nothing that compares to the emotion that you generate through sport. Try not to get too involved with the kids' basketball in terms of, yelling and screaming sort of stuff. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot from my time there. Probably didn't finish the way I would have liked to my last season there. I coached a little bit to I was at Sandringham. I coached Maccabi just in Division 2 Big V for a couple of years as well. I really enjoyed that. It was very much COVID interrupted, but I enjoyed that. Potentially, yeah. I certainly will leave the door open if maybe in a few years' time. I certainly don't want to do it from a full-time perspective. I know there's coaches that do that, and I considered that when I finished playing, but I wasn't prepared to move around anymore. And if you're going to be a full-time coach, you've got to be prepared to move, interstate, overseas, that type of thing. And I didn't want to do that anymore. Yeah,
no, 100%. But I think it's something that probably a lot of us could see you continuing to go on, because you were certainly one of the most intelligent forwards in the game, in terms of, I think you even had the nickname Sneaky. Like, you're always thinking, if there was a backdoor cut there to be open, if there was an opportunity to take advantage of, sleeping defense, or if you could, it was pretty evident to the everyday spectator that you were potentially going to go down that coaching route later on, because you were one of those thinking type players. In terms of that, and in terms of going into finance and those sort of things, when we chat to, like we had Jacob Holmes on the podcast, who pretty early on knew he wanted to go down a law path, and now is head of the Players Association. Was finance something? Did you study during your playing days?
I yes and no. So I guess a bit of a long story. When I left, way back when I was before I joined. Actually, when I joined the Tigers, so I got cut by West Sydney in about '99. Came back down to Melbourne. I started training with them, but I had no guarantees of making the team. So I enrolled in an IT course at Box Hill TAFE. I did that for a year, but kind of realised that wasn't for me. Luckily at the time, I was able to then had a good year that year and got signed with another contract by the Tigers. And then in terms of from there, it was about 2005, 2006, something like that. We had a recruitment company was a sponsor of the Tigers. So I took advantage of that. Sort of life after basketball preparation stuff was not something that was ever really looked at too much. We weren't sort of given assistance or advice or anything, but we had this recruitment come in and had an opportunity to go and speak to them. So I did one of those personality tests, IQ tests. One of the things that came up on it was that I'd be suited to was being a mortgage broker. So I happened to fill out a profile not long after that, just referencing that, what would you be doing? And I sort of mentioned a mortgage broker. And at similar time, Greg O'Neill, who was the owner of Latrobe, had come on board with the Tigers, saw my profile and said, would you be interested in coming to do some part-time work? He was on the other side of that with a lender, but would you be interested? So I said, yeah, I jumped at that and I went and did some part-time work with him. I actually just went out with the BDM, a couple of BDMs that I would go out with on the afternoons occasionally. I went and did my Cert 4 in financial services at the time as well. And I started to think about what I'd be doing after basketball. So I was about 30 years old at the time. So I was starting to think about what I was going to be doing. Actually, the following year we had OAMPS. You remember OAMPS Insurance was a lead sponsor. So I got to know the CEO there, and he actually asked me if I wanted to work with him. So an opportunity came up to go in their sports insurance. They were trying to get into basketball, so sports insurance. So one off season, I worked sort of 4 days a week at the office in the city. So full time there, well, essentially full time, but 4 days a week. I was in there early in the morning and until late. So I did that for a while. I always kind of planned from there that when I actually started to have contact with a mortgage broker and group, Smartline, and I went and chatted with them and was looking at ways to sort of get involved in doing that while I was still playing basketball. But then when all the
go ahead.
Bit of stuff that went down with the Tigers at the end of that, and I ended up moving interstate. And at a similar time, I had just had my daughter and my son was born interstate, and it was just too hard to do that while I was interstate. So it wasn't till I came back to Melbourne 2012 when I retired that I started to look at different things. I went down a different path for a few years though, but I'd always kept in contact with Greg O'Neill. I always used him as a referrer on my job interviews and my CV and that type of thing. I'd always kept in contact with him. He'd always said to me from way back that if I ever wanted a job that he'd look after me. So in 2017, as a 42-year-old, I was kind of over the job that I was doing. Wasn't getting along with the boss. It was a bit of a struggle there. I walked into his office and sort of said, "I want to be a BDM. Can we make it work?" And he said, "Absolutely, but you got to learn it before you can sell it." So, I'd never, with basically no, apart from going out with some BDMs for a bit, basically no credit experience whatsoever. Threw me into the deep end in commercial lending as a commercial credit analyst. Big time threw me into the deep end. I certainly went home the first few weeks going, how the hell am I going to, this is way above me. But started to pick things up pretty quickly. I was able to move through the ranks a little bit there, take on some different roles, do some different things. And then sort of 2 years in, I got the opportunity for this role, and I've been in that ever since. So I was always kind of preparing, but not really knowing what I was going to do.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you had your eyes wide open, though. And it's interesting, the timing when you talk about, sort of 2005 and looking at opportunities for the workforce there and sort of life after basketball, because it was around 2004, 5, 6, and 7. You played your best hoops. You were the most successful. You had your best Sixth Man of the Year award in there. Do you think maybe having something out and not just being fully immersed in everything was about hoops? Was it just coincidence that played your best?
Yeah, maybe in that. I was never one of those who was fully caught up in, just sort of seeing myself as a basketball type thing. I always had. Right. I like to do other things as well. Yeah. I love my basketball, but I can't do it 24/7.
Yeah.
So, but I was at the age, I was 30. I was married. We were looking to start a family. So I started to look to what was going to happen afterwards. I had my time at the Tigers around that 2005 was the end of the Gaze, Copeland, Bradke era, and all those guys were sort of late 30s, potentially even, he might have even been 40 by the time he finished. Can't remember, but it was a lot of some of the older guys. Was kind of made you think about what was going to happen next. Well, it made me think about what was going to happen next. And I certainly never thought I'd play till I was 36 either. So it was always that. Yes, while it's going well now, who knows what happens? I'd seen lots of people come in and be gone within a year or two, and weren't sure what they were going to do after that. So I certainly started to plan for for when that might come.
Yeah, no, that's good forethought, because for anyone that's listened to all the previous episodes of the podcast, we do know that a lot of players really struggled, and I won't go too much over it, because if people, the regular listeners will already know, a lot of them just admitted straight up that if they didn't have something to jump to when the career came to an end, because sometimes it came to an end quite abruptly, they were pretty lost to the point of even depression and those sort of things. And you spoke earlier about the emotions of basketball and those sort of things, and all of a sudden that those highs aren't there anymore. And that a lot of the players have said that they're never going to be able to experience those highs again. But I guess as long as you've got distraction and you've got something else to go to, the WNBL players, Susie Bakovic, Christy Harrow, that we had on, they mentioned they had family to go to because they fell pregnant as soon as they just having something to go to. So I think that was good. And you mentioned Greg O'Neill. He was probably a bit ahead of his time in that. I think he's now the actual chairman of the Players Association. So I think he's quite passionate about obviously hoops, but also making sure that the athletes have every opportunity to do well in life, not just in sports. So that's really good.
Yeah, he was great in that. I mean, there was quite a few people that worked at La Trobe at different times, who worked on our bench. Luke Kendall. There was a lot of different people that did different things at different times. Greg was great in opening a door, but then it was up to you to make it. Like, it wasn't sort of handed to you on a platter. It was certainly an opportunity that he would provide, and then you got to go and earn it. And I think that's the way it should be. Yeah,
absolutely, 100%. Because I think you buy into it more then as well, and you want to have some purpose in life as well, not just have a job for the sake of having a job. Something you can take a bit of pride in. Yeah. Now, in terms of you as a player, and when I mentioned on our podcast Instagram page that you were coming on, we had a few messages and those sort of things come through, and one sort of caught my eye was that I'll quote them here: "You always seem competitive, yet you're always composed, even in the most heated of environments." This person then went on to preface the Game 4 of the Tigers South Dragons grand final, when Chris Anstey decked Reece Carter, and then sort of all hell broke loose. And you were straight in there between Vicona and Chris Anstey. There wouldn't be too many putting their hands up to do that job. So some of them said, did he ever think about going into the police force? Was that something that you ever gave thought to?
No, not at all. Not at all. I'm certainly not a confrontational type person. I don't look for that type of thing. I do remember that. That was actually
peacemaker on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, that was actually Game 3. It was funny too, because I remember clearly that when that happened, Mika was pretty fired up, and I remember running in and grabbing him. I grabbed him around the neck. I had a pretty solid grab, but it was like I wasn't even there. He just kept walking and going at Chris like I wasn't even there. He was certainly a strong man, that's for sure, Mika. I wouldn't wanted to have messed with him.
Yeah, no, played well above his height. Absolutely. Super strong. Definitely for the listeners that'll be listening to this, there's plenty of highlights on exactly what we just chatted about there online. It was a pretty fiery series, but again, they're the series that sort of go down in history as the really entertaining ones. Same as the one where Darryl McDonald's last season and winning the final.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that Dragons one especially had the potential to be massive, but obviously they were gone again. They were gone again after that. Yeah, so
that
missed opportunity. That's for sure.
Yeah, 100%. In terms of your playing career, I'm just going to sort of take a little snapshot here, just to fill anyone that's sort of, because we do have some listeners that are sort of in their late teens, early 20s that probably born, no offense, but when you were going around here. So you started with the Giants in 95, 97, or went through to 97, and then obviously to the West Sydney. We've got a lot of West Sydney fans on here, and obviously they're another club that really, if they could have still stuck around, they seem to always put together some pretty competitive teams. And then Melbourne from 2000 to 2009, obviously very successful. There's a pretty interesting stat that we put up yesterday about yourself. Of your 17 seasons, there were only 2 seasons where a team with Stephen Hoare in it didn't make the finals. So that's pretty impressive considering you played at multiple clubs. I mean, one could argue that, if you played for the Perth Wildcats, you might have 15 finals if you played in 15 seasons. But again, that's more of a culture and a whole club thing. To be able to do that across multiple teams is pretty good. 4 grand final series consecutively. And then, as you mentioned before, went up north to Townsville and finished in the Gold Coast there. The 2 championships Stephen won was 2006 and 2008, the Tigers, and was NBL best 6th man twice in 2006 and 2007. Before we go through all of that, I guess a little bit more in depth, some people would be interested in knowing sort of where did it all start? Who was your rep club? Who was your influence? Did you have brothers or sisters that got you into it? What was the situation growing up?
Yeah, I started playing when I was 8, just for my primary school. I grew up in East Doncaster. Was playing just with my primary school. I had an older brother and a younger brother, so the older brother had started a couple of years before me. I was fine. I don't really know how we got into basketball necessarily. I do remember watching my old man play. He never played as a kid, but he started playing in an over 35s competition. And we remember going to a game at Doncats to watch him play. And my only recollection of him playing is snapping his tibia in a game and going to hospital. So it wasn't a great start from that perspective. It certainly wasn't something that we were aspiring to.
Is the old man a big fellow like yourself, 6'6", 6'7"? Or?
No, he's probably about 6. I think he's about 6'4" at his peak, 6'5" maybe.
Yeah. And you were the tallest of your brothers?
Big for his generation. Yeah, I'm tall as my older brother's probably 6'4", and younger brother's probably 6'6".
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So carry on.
So yeah, played for my primary school from grade 2 up until once grade 6. I started playing with Doncats just on a Saturday. Just did that for a couple of years. The Doncats rep tried to get me to come and play a little bit, but and I did fill in here and there, but didn't really play. And it wasn't until under 16 top age that I went down to Bulleen and started playing rep down at Bulleen. So I played, I was in the under 16 second team top age. I certainly didn't have a glittering junior career. I was in the 18 fourth team bottom age. I was 18 second team top age. I certainly never went to any state camps, state trials, or development squads or anything like that.
Yeah, right.
Even top age, even bottom age under 20s, I was still in the second team. Had an opportunity, I guess, because my older brother was in the first, to potentially play with that, but I was comfortable being in the seconds because I got to play a lot more than I would have had I been in the first.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And it wasn't until top age under 20s that I was in the first team at my own club. And I guess my coming out party a little bit was, I guess I was a late bloomer physically. I was tall when I was young, and then sort of everyone sort of passed and took over, and I had to I think that's kind of helped me in terms of finding my ways and spaces and angles and all that type of stuff. When I couldn't compete physically, I had to find other ways to compete. And then when I did grow and it all sort of came together, I very quickly kind of went through the ranks. So I remember my under 20s, there was a tournament back then called the Great Australian Shootout. It used to be teams from all the best teams in under 20s from Victoria and some interstate, and we'd have a bunch of US teams would come out. And it was a pretty big tournament held at Dandenong for a bunch of years. And my under 20s year, the Melbourne Tigers were the best team, had been for years. It was Chris Anstey, Andrew Walter, Brett Rainbow, Dave Patrick, Dave, all these guys had played little bits of NBL, but I think there were 6 of them made the state team that year. And they just never got beaten. And we played them in a game at Diamond Valley on court 1. And they had a couple of guys away, but we beat them by 25 and I had 40. And I think it was the first time people kind of went, well, who's this guy? It was kind of my coming out party a little bit. So I got invited down to play or start to train with the Siebel team at Bulleen. ended up playing one season there. I mean, I averaged 3 points and 3 rebounds a game, so I certainly didn't light the world on fire or anything. But you got to play that big V, what was it called, the VBA on a Wednesday night. So I started to play a bit of that as well, and got a little bit of exposure there. And end of that season, the Northeast Melbourne, who were a defeated team to the Giants, asked me to come down and train with them. So the following year, I started training with that team, so getting to train with the NBL team under Brett Brown. So I was doing the combination. I was training for the development stuff for the Siebel team, or CBA, I think it might have been at the time, and the NBL team. And I was doing a full-time uni course. So I was doing a human movement course at RMIT in Bundoora. So my days were very, very long. I started doing that year. They had some injuries, the Giants, and I ended up actually playing my first NBL game that year. I went to Adelaide and filled in with some injuries. So I kind of went from being, in the second team at my own club to playing NBL in probably about 18 months. So it all kind of happened very, very quickly.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting because we do hear of these rare stories like yours where things can all of a sudden come together, and it's probably a lesson out there for the coaches, in terms of juniors and sticking with developing them, and it's not all about the first and all who goes to the state teams. I mean, we had Mick Hill on last week, who was similar to yourself, was a very late bloomer, didn't get picked up to the NBL till 23 because he wasn't going to any of those state teams, and he wasn't a flat out 30 points a game scorer and those sort of things. So it is interesting because obviously the majority will have come through state teams, or have had a lot that get picked up to go to the AIS after a nationals or something like that. So I guess that begs the question: at what point did you actually think, like, this could actually be my job? I could actually play basketball.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I certainly had the dreams, but it was never an aim. I was never at that level that I thought, I want to try to be an NBL player. I certainly spent my afternoons either in my backyard, or I'd run up to the local primary school and just play basketball for hours because I loved doing it. But I didn't do it because I had an aim necessarily to go anywhere. It was just because I loved doing it. I don't know. It was funny because I guess even the next year, so I trained, obviously I had that first year training with them. The next year I got signed in the 10. So my first contract was for $1. My first NBL contract was $1. I had to give you something, so my contract was $1.
Wow.
I very, very kind of vividly remember that conversation, sitting with Brett Brown and Steve Breeney, offering me a contract, trying to justify why it was $1. But they knew I was going to take it because there was an opportunity that was there that I wasn't going to turn down. But I probably felt at the time also that I didn't deserve to be there. I was kind of right spot, right time. I hadn't really been coached. I hadn't really been. I was very raw still. I was still pretty skinny.
To be fair, sometimes that's just, you have those sliding doors moments in life where it's just right time, right place.
And so I took the opportunity, and it was hard. I was still training in the 10, but I was still training with the playing the Siebel that year, and I was putting good numbers up in Siebel. I was sort of averaging 20 and 10, so I was kind of making my way through, doing pretty well there. But I didn't feel like I probably deserved to be an NBL player. It's funny, we used to go to the after-game functions and stuff, and I look back on this, I wouldn't say fondly, but I would kind of, I'd sign autographs and stuff, but I would try to steer clear of that. I didn't want to sign autographs because I was like, why the hell do you want my autograph? I had that thing of, I don't really deserve to be here. So I would try to pretend that I didn't see kids and things like that because I didn't want to sign it because I was like, why?
You feel guilty about it?
Yeah, I'm nobody. Why you want? So I felt funny doing that. But I worked really, really hard. So, I mean, that youth, that development team, we used to train 3 or 4 times a week. So Mondays I would train for like 4 hours a day with the Siebel team and then with the Giants team. Same thing on a Tuesday. Wednesday would play VBA. Same thing again on a Thursday. Friday would be a bit lighter. I'd have the games on the weekend, the NBL games and the Siebel games. And I was doing a full-time uni course at the same time. So I didn't have much of a life. But by that stage, it was I want to show that I deserve to be here. And so I put in a hell of a lot of time back then as well. I was lucky that I was still living at home, that my parents could support it. And I'd leave first thing in the morning. I wouldn't get home until 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. I'd have dinner, go to bed, get up and do the same thing again the next day. So it was pretty rough for a while there, but by that stage, I had the aim that I wanted to prove myself.
Yeah.
Now, it's funny, I never really got an opportunity. To my second year, the Giants, they brought in a minimum salary that year. So I ended up getting, at the end of the season, they brought in a minimum salary of 7.5. So this is part of the Players Association. I was talking with Jacob. They brought in a minimum salary of 7.5. So at the end of that year, they gave me a check for $7,000, and it was like the greatest thing of all time. And the next year, I signed for 10,000. And again, probably that year, I felt like I finally deserved my position. And that was a year that Paul Rees did a knee, and we brought in Andrew Goodwin and Matthew Rees to kind of replace him. So it pushed me down the list a little bit further. And I remember talking to Brett Brown about it one year, just I was saying, because late in the year, I just wasn't getting a chance. And he was saying, you're doing everything right, but got to give these guys opportunity. We've brought them down from interstate to play, blah, blah, blah. Which was pretty frustrating. When I did play, I did okay. I mean, I played 27 games for the Giants, but I reckon I probably averaged, in terms of got on the court 27 games, but I reckon I probably averaged about 2 minutes a game during that time. So it's hard to do anything. There's one game I played 3 seconds, I remember. And DMAC, as I came on, there was free throws. Somebody fouled out, and DMAC looked at me and goes, "I'll get you a shot." And the ball came in, he threw it at half court, and I shot it, almost made it. But so you didn't play a lot. But at the end of that,
sorry to interrupt, but so obviously you're struggling to get some court time in here. When you talk about the Wednesday night VBA and the stuff with the development league, is Brett Brown as the head coach coming and observing that stuff to see how you're going?
Not so much. I don't remember him being there too much for that. I played for Coburg.
Because that's the only chance you really have to prove yourself, obviously, if you're not getting...
Yeah, but I mean, he's seeing you 4 days a week of training as well.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's just the games. He'd come occasionally. The same with the Seaboard. I was putting up really good numbers back in the Seaboard, but it was just a matter of getting the opportunity against... We were an older veteran team. They'd won it the year before I started there. That was DMAC's first year, so they were still sort of in that upper echelon team with an older group. So it was hard to push into that. I know you've had Shanahan on in the past. He'd probably say he kind of struggled to find a footing around there as well. But he was a few rungs up on me. It was funny. It wasn't until probably the end of that year that I felt like I earned my position. And I got cut at the end of that year because Paul Maley was going to be coming back, and I got cut. So it was once I finally felt like I deserved to be there, I got cut, and it was a real reality check. We tried. I had somebody who was assisting me at the time. No other clubs were interested, but luckily at the time the West Sydney Razorbacks had been announced. So I went up. It was also that time where the winter was changing from a winter to summer season. So they did 3 seasons in 2 years. So I missed a season of NBL while I went up and played a season of Seaboard with the West Sydney Slammers because they were going to become the Razorbacks with no guarantees. I was going to be in the team, but just took a chance and went up. Again, I took a chance. I got paid $10,000 to do it. They paid for my accommodation for the Seaboard season for 6 months, and we spent our days doing schoolwork, working at schools. Sorry, not working at schools, doing clinics and camps and stuff for schools, and sort of training and getting ready for that season. It was a pretty lonely season because all the teammates, it was a semi-professional. All my teammates were studying and working everything, so we just trained at night. So during the days were pretty lonely at times. I had a mate who became a good mate who was in the same situation as me, Lee Carlson, who had come out of the institute, and we lived together and relied on each other a fair bit that year, and then both ended up making the Razorbacks the next season. So kind of worked out well, but it was another sort of leap of faith just to have a crack.
So at this stage, were you still also doing a human movement course, or?
No, I ended up, my last year, I ended up splitting it over 2 part-time.
Yeah.
Just because I just didn't have the time. It just wasn't possible to do it. So I had finished it by then. By the time I moved to West Sydney, I had finished that. I think I moved as a 20, must have been 22 when I moved up there.
Yeah. And we'll sort of skip forwards to, obviously, after you get cut by West Sydney, you come down to Melbourne. We won't make you back over every year, but obviously everything that you've been building up to over your career somehow gets the best out of you in your years at Melbourne. Was that the coaches? Was it just the system? Was it Can you even put your finger on why all of a sudden, you were, so efficient, so valuable, and probably reliable is the best word, because with your game, I think maybe because it didn't rely on flashiness, I don't know, you can tell us, but like you always, as a fan, we always knew what we were going to get. When it came down to having you on, it was almost like you didn't need to be motivated. You were just like, I'm a professional. This is what I do. When it's my time to go on, I do what I do. I crash boards. I hit the open three. All those sort of things. Can you put your finger on why you seem to excel more at the Tigers?
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination of things. So I spent 2 years at West Sydney, and then I got cut again. So for the second time, I'd been cut, and again, no one was interested. So I ended up just going down and training with the Tigers. I used to do scrimmaging on whatever day it was, and I went down and just started scrimmaging with the team. And then they asked me to stick around for the preseason. And then they signed again. I signed for minimum. I was good at doing minimum, which was 20 grand by this stage, but it was and I wasn't even in the 10. I was 10th or 11th, and I'd get an extra $100 every time I was in the 10. But I remember coming back from West Sydney talking to. I saw you had Simon Dwight on this previously as well, but I remember talking to him one time, just saying, "I just need another chance," because I felt like I just needed the right situation, right? I just needed another chance. So when I got there, well, that was the things that I prided myself on, was just working my ass off as much as I could, just doing the little things as much as I could. I walked into a team with Gaze, Copeland, Bradkey, the biggest names in the game, Marcus Timmins. And I quickly just kind of found myself a bit of a role, bit of a situation, and had a pretty good year that first year. They ended up signing me for another 2 at the end of that, and for the first time, I kind of felt like I belonged. But it was a combination of just feeling comfortable straight away with that group. Daniel Egan left my second year, maybe my third year there, and all of a sudden, I had an opportunity to start and play. You mentioned that sneaky nickname before. That came about because I was playing with 4 of legends of the game. And it was like, if I'm going to get involved, then I've just got to do the other things. Like, they're not running plays for me. It's just a matter of, and the shuffle helped me as well, because I was a good passer and I read the game well. I got to touch the ball a lot more than I ever had before, because it would come through me a lot. So I could pick spots and then I just knew if I was going to get it, I had to crash the boards. I had to make cuts that people could not ignore passing to me. If I was wide open under the key, they got to give it to me. So it was just a matter of that. I was just trying to find the gaps, find the spaces, crash the boards, play defensively, get the ball to Drury when he needed it, get the ball to Hoagie when he needed it, and kind of establish a bit of a role doing that. And it kind of all just sort of clicked into space. Yeah. I always saw, even later when those guys moved on and it was Anstey and DMAC and these guys were the main guys, I always sort of thought, even when I was winning the 6th man of the year, I always thought my role was to make it easier for the stars. I was never a star. We weren't running plays for me and things like that. My job was always to make it easy. So if you're going to focus too much on Chris or Bradkey on a rebound, then I'm going to get it. If you're going to focus on DMAC while he's penetrating, well, I'm going to get open under the basket and I'm going to shoot a layup. Or if he misses it, I'm going to put it back in. Or I'm going to be spread in the right position that if my man helps, I'm going to shoot the open 3. It was just kind of taking the pressure off those guys. And I was lucky too that I played with a bunch of guys who were really unselfish. Yeah. Who would make the passes and would do that. So it was a good fit.
Well, you explained it perfectly, because not only that, but it would just break the back of oppositions, when they're putting all this work into, double teaming or, extra help from the weak side on these stars. And then they think they've got it covered and they kick it to you in the corner and you splash a 3, and it's just like mentally it just breaks them, to be ready. And then all of a sudden, maybe you do it often enough and the pressure comes off those guys and then they can go back and do it. But I think you nailed it when you said your passing had to be great, because there are things, if anyone knows the shuffle offense, I was lucky enough to play under Al Westover in juniors, and when you've got, in first and thirds and all those sort of things, you might only have a split second to make the pass. And it's a lot of the time, it's not even to the player. It has to be to a space where they're going to be. Yeah. So for you to do that, obviously that then wins the respect of your teammates. And, they want you in that 1 position or 4 position. And and feeding that ball in, and then getting those rebounds. So I think that's a valuable lesson that you just described there. And
it's funny.
Yeah, go ahead.
With Drury, when I first started, and I'd be in that feeder spot, Drury would. We had an exchange play. You exchange the 2-guard and the feeder spot, which was the one, considered the one, but the 1 and 2 would exchange.
It is, yeah.
So he would sub me out of that or exchange me out of that position to get Warwick Giddy into that spot so Warwick would make the pass. And he would do that a little bit. He wanted somebody else. And it wasn't until probably my second or third year that he started doing the reverse. He was always making sure that it was me in that position because he knew that I could put the ball in the right spot. So that was a good feeling to have that. You weren't getting removed from the position. You were getting added to the position to have that involvement, which was good.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think what also drills at home, and Mikel talked about last week, is, you know, if you're not going to be the star of the team, just try and find your role and be the best you can at that. Because for anyone that knows the shuffle offense, the feeder doesn't do a whole lot, to be honest. But the ball goes through them a lot. And by the way, if for anyone that doesn't know the shuffle offense, obviously usually the 1 would be the point guard, but it's actually the 3 in the shuffle offense.
It's confusing.
The 1 is the feeder, yeah. So it's a bit confusing, but yeah, like that's the lesson again. You know, I probably can't reiterate it enough with you guys that give up your time to come on. Is find out what you can do, and that's going to help the team and be really, really good at it. Because in this day and age, I've got a 9-year-old. You know, they all want to shoot the deep Steph Curry 3 and tap their head with 3 fingers and, you know, all that sort of stuff, you know. But it's find what you can do. Simon Dwight talked about it again. We mentioned this last week. Was, you know, he said, I found that being a weak side defender was my best attribute, because I could come across and block shots when, you know, they weren't ready to become an incredible shot blocker and have that reach. So no,
incredible with that.
Yeah, you raised a really, really good point. Now, in terms of, I guess we always like to give a little bit of an insight to the fans that, you know, we buy our tickets, we show up to the game, we watch the game, we love, and then we go home. Can you sort of give us, and you can pick any year, a example of, say you're playing for Melbourne and you go to Brisbane. What's the day of a game like, assuming you're playing at night? Do you flight the day before? Do you flight the day of a game? And what's the routine?
Yeah, we ideally it was a fly the day before, the afternoon before. Sort of get up there for dinner that night. If you got in a bit earlier, you'd probably go somewhere and have a bit of a workout. But then it was sleep in the morning. Generally speaking, the away team has the court from 11 till 12, around that sort of mark. So you would sort of sleep in, have your breakfast, go to shoot around at the venue, and you'd have a shoot around session for an hour. Depending on who the coach was, different years. Sometimes those sessions were fairly intense. Sometimes they were very light, just depending on the coach and the situation. Come home from that, the Tigers did it a little bit differently. We used to, when I first started, we'd come home, have a meal, and then you have another meal around 4:30 or something, but people stopped going to that one. So we ended up having sort of the 1:30, having a big meal. Sort of when you came back, that'd be your big meal. And then it was kind of just time free. And then until you left to the game, we try to get to the game, get changed at the hotel, apart from shoes and things, obviously, but uniform on, and try to get to the game sort of an hour and a half before.
So you're already in uniform before you go?
Sorry?
So obviously these days we see the guys walking in, you know, suits or fashion attire or whatever. Were you already in uniforms going to the game?
Yeah, and I would for away games. Yes, absolutely. I'm not sure if they do these days. I would imagine away teams probably still turn up in the uniforms.
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly dress there, get to the game, and then I used to brace. So you get there and put the braces on and sort of get organised, and then sort of start the preparation for the game.
Yeah.
But the day of the game is pretty light, really. Just have that shoot around. The rest of it's, but some people would sleep for 3 or 4 hours in the afternoon. I kind of just like to get an hour sleep in and go for a walk wherever I was. Go for a walk, generally pretty close to the city, but just get out and walk and be active and do things for a while. Come back, have a bit of a nap, and then get ready to go.
Yeah, obviously within any team you're going to have a mix of personalities. Was there anyone that really struggled before a game in terms of nerves and just couldn't sleep?
Not that I'm aware of. I think we're kind of the other way. The guys that who could sleep 3 or 4 hours, I don't understand how they could do it. It was crazy. Maybe more when it comes to finals. Certainly, I was certainly one of those in playoff time. That
makes sense.
That nerves was a thing. I never saw nerves as being an issue, though. To me, it was always like nerves. As long as you're not nervous once the game starts, but being nervous leading up to and even warm-ups and stuff. If you're not nervous, I kind of took the edge. If you're not nervous, then it doesn't mean anything to you. But nerves show that this means something to you, and you're kind of ready to go. And as long as that didn't impact once the balls ticked up, then I thought it was a good thing. I never had any issue with. Some people try to have that bravado. No, I'm not nervous. I'm not nervous. Yeah. So what if you are? Like, I don't know. I've never understood that.
Yeah. No, 100%. In terms of obviously post game, then us as the fans go home. Back then, sort of 15 years ago now, in 2008 sort of era, was it then upon yourselves to whether you wanted to eat or not, or do you have a post meal and then cool down? What's the process?
Yeah, we cool down straight away. If hotels had pools, we generally went straight back to the pool and had a bit of a stretch down, a few exercises and different things, and then it'd be shower. And then there was always a meal, or very regularly there was a meal. And then it's kind of on your own. I mean, people used to go out a fair bit back then. One thing the Tigers did, which they wouldn't do these days for sure, but it was a good thing from a team bonding position. It started when Seamus McPeak was a sponsor of the Tigers, and Copes and those guys were playing. We started going back to his room after games, and there'd just be a few beers and things, and the team would sit around and have a couple of beers and chat about the game or chat about anything really. And then people would go off in their own ways, and that continued on pretty much my whole time with the Tigers. At the end of a game, we'd go back to Seamus's room. The amount of alcohol started to increase, which probably wasn't such a good thing, but we had the whole team pretty much there, team manager, everybody, and we'd sit around, and Seamus always had a nice big suite. So you'd sit around and I thought it was a great sort of team bonding thing. We were a tight-knit group, and I think part of it was because of that. We'd all just get together. It didn't matter win, lose, or draw. Get together, have a drink, bitch about the coach or the refs or the, whatever it might have been. And
get off your chest,
not that Al was always there as well. So it wasn't like we were sort of a coach bitch session, but obviously people have frustration about playing time or not sort of things. But it was, you get there and just have a chat about different things, and it was good.
Yeah,
it probably got a little bit excessive, but it was good.
Yeah, well, I mean, you had a very successful era there, so whatever you're doing was working. In terms of sort of the next day, obviously there could be two options here. You could potentially have a second road trip game, especially if you're in Queensland. You could be doing the second part of that. But let's assume you're not. Was recovery taken seriously? I guess the next day was there or that was just sort of travel home, and if you've got niggles, deal with them.
Yeah, it depended on the team, both from a coaching perspective and also from the other players' perspective. Like we'd different places where you would do a beach session, especially if you're in Wollongong, for example, we go down to the beach in the morning, places like that. But there was always some people that would not get in the water, and it depended on the level of authority from above, or whether people were made to, or whether it was forgiven. So. Sometimes there was recovery things. Other times it was just, sometimes you'd fly out early as well, so you didn't have time to do things. But and then it's sort of on you. I mean, things have changed a whole lot. I mean, my time at Tigers, we very rarely had a physio come. Once a week we'd have a physio come, and we were training out at Sandringham, and if you needed to go and see a physio, it was like a 45-minute drive away. So it wasn't ideal. It didn't sort of encourage you to go there. It was certainly a different. Even though it was only sort of 15 years ago, it was very different to how it is now. It's funny, and it helped when I went to Townsville because everything was so much closer. But it wasn't until I went to Townsville, almost, this is going to sound ridiculous, that it was the first time that I actually felt like I was a professional athlete, because I would turn up to practice, I would have a drink bottle there filled up with my name on it. They'd come around and tape your ankles if you wanted to have it. We'd train. The drinks would be refilled the whole time. Team manager come up after the game with an ice pack, after training with an ice pack, tell me I'd have an ice bath run for me if I wanted it. which I used a lot in Townsville because it didn't feel so bad in Townsville. Physio or massage was 5 minutes away. If you wanted it, you just book it in. The gym was there. It was like, this is kind of the first time I feel like I'm a professional athlete. And I'd been in the league for 13 years or something by that stage. It was kind of bizarre. But
yeah, no, it just shows how far it's come. Thanks for that insight. That's really interesting because I think it's something that us on the outside sort of think about. And it also gives us some appreciation for how much you put into it, because obviously, especially with social media these days, fans will go to the game and depending on win or lose, it's just, you're either shit or you're a legend, as a player, and the appreciation for what goes in behind the scenes isn't always taken into consideration, especially if you're like back then you were saying, it might be contributing to the bills, but you've still, as well as thinking about how well you're going to play, you're thinking about, have I got enough to look after the family? We've got a little one on the way. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. I've got to, so it's really interesting getting these insights. Now, obviously you went on to coaching sort of post playing. Do you want to just sort of back over your final season which is the Blaze, Gold Coast, who it looks like the NBL might be trying to get a team there sometime in the future. Was it a tap on the shoulder? Was it your decision? Just let us sort of know how that went down.
Yes, it was my decision, but I don't necessarily think that they would have re-signed me anyway.
Right.
It was funny when the Tigers, the stuff happened with the Tigers. I had a bad situation with the Tigers when it all finished up. I was going to retire then. I was very lucky that I got, because it happened all so late. The only reason I got a gig in Townsville was because Tommy Greer had agreed to go there, and then at the last second changed his mind, so there was a spot available. So I was able to continue my career. I was thinking I'd probably retire at the end of that, and at the end of that season, Gold Coast offered me 2 years, and at more money than West, because I took a big pay cut to go to, or reduction to go to Townsville, and then for 2 years and a bit of money, so I took that up. I think in the last year there, and my wife gets frustrated when I tell this because I'd never sort of discussed it with her, but it was kind of like my son was born at the end of my first year in Gold Coast. So we're back there for the second year. I was the oldest guy in the league at the time. And I was up and down. Sometimes I played well, sometimes I didn't. I was up and down from a mental point of view. Sometimes the category was that we'd lose a game and I wasn't necessarily that upset about it. And I was kind of remember thinking that year, I don't have that same fire anymore. I also remember picking up my son first thing in the morning with a two-story townhouse, and me walking down the stairs, holding him in one arm and sort of gripping the rail with the other, and kind of struggling to walk down the stairs and just going, I can't keep doing this. Like physically, I just can't keep doing this. So I decided, probably earlier, maybe even halfway through, maybe later. Maybe earlier, that this was going to be the last one. So it was never a decision or a tap on the shoulder that I had to make, because I'd made the decision well and truly that this was going to be the last one. And as it turned out, the Blaze went under at the end of that year anyway. So that would have been, had I not decided, it would have been the end anyway.
Yeah, well, that's a great way to go out, I guess. So going out on your own terms, and you're way less likely to have regrets in that regard. In terms of that final year, to sort of give the fans a bit more of an insight, and you don't have to name names or anything, but in that final year, what would be, I guess, the top guy, the top salary earner earning, and I guess like your 10th player or something,
I don't know what the minimum salary was back then. I think it was about 30 or 40, something like that, potentially. So that's probably around that sort of mark.
Yeah.
I have no idea, to be honest. The top guys, Ira Clark came in that, was he that year or the year before? I think he was the last year. He might have been the first year. I would imagine he would have been pretty well played. He was well paid. He was a sort of pretty big name at the time. I don't know. Maybe the top imports might have been pushing 200K, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, because I think back then we're sort of talking salary caps of 700,000, maybe.
Bit more then. A few years earlier, it was around that mark with Melbourne. But
yeah. No, it's interesting because it's obviously sort of come a long way now, and even now you have a separate cap for like next star players and those sort of things and all
It's
that
all
sort of
over the place now.
all that sort of jazz. When you went into coaching, was there one coach that you had throughout your professional career that I guess you feel you're most like, or you learnt the most from?
I had such a wide range of coaches. I mean, I started, and I was lucky too. I mean, I had Brett Brown to start with. I clearly learnt the most from him just because I was so raw at the stage. So
Yeah,
certainly learnt the most from him. I certainly learnt an attitude to play with from him in terms of how I approach things. He ripped into me a number of times early in the days about. I remember going to my first pre-season camp. We were down in Warrnambool. We're doing a warm-up drill, which he used to love. It was a full court drill where you would come down and then sort of finish with a bit of a runner type thing into the key, or avoid the charge was the big thing. Avoid the charge, so you kind of on a stride stop across to the middle. And I was taking it pretty casually, and it was the first drill of the first morning. And he came storming from down. There was a stand at Warrnambool, and he came charging down the stairs, yelling at me to go home. A whole lot of colourful language in there, telling me to piss off. If that was going to be my attitude this camp, I might as well just leave now. So that was a real eye opener, and different things on that. It was just right, got to be switched on right from the start, and I certainly carried that with me the rest of my career. So I learnt the most from him. Gordy was good. Learned a lot from Gordy McLeod. Obviously played under Lindsay for 5 years, and then Al 4 years. Both very, very different in the way they approached it. Trevor Gleeson for a year, and then Joey Wright for 2 years. So a lot of very well-known, very well-respected coaches. I wouldn't say that I ever had a coach that I thought did everything right. Everyone has their different opinions on different things and how they treat things. And some of your opinion is going to be based on also how they use you rather than necessarily how they are as a coach. I think the hardest working coach that I ever played for was Trevor Gleeson. I think his preparation and his attention to detail was incredible. He's probably rubbed some of the players the wrong way a little bit as well. You have to find that right mix, and I think when he got to Perth, he found the right mix for his coaching style, and that just, you saw what that became.
Yeah.
So I don't know that necessarily there's any one particular one that I'd point to. I certainly learned different things from different people and took different things as to how I would approach things. But even then, I mean, I coached the 2 years then, and I walked away at the second year going, I changed. I left Sandringham. I was working in Sandringham at the time. I changed to a different role, different job with a different events company. So they moved me on at the same time, but they were going to do that anyway, I think.
I just had a question for you. On you mentioned these coaches that you had, and there's this, I guess, sort of, it might say something about you. I mean, we're talking about, and this is just from an outside perspective, obviously, but you got Trevor Gleeson, Joey Wright, Al Westover, obviously Lindsay in there as well, and the story you already mentioned with Brett Brown. When you think about their personalities, perhaps the resilience you built up by not being in the first team for so many years, and just the willingness to work hard. Because I could imagine anyone that had a bit of a sensitive or thin skin with those sort of coaches, they're going to struggle with the feedback that they might be getting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you hear that it's a little bit different now, and you need to tread a little bit more carefully with players, whether that's accurate or not at the elite level. I don't necessarily know. Certainly, probably at junior level, but yeah, if you weren't, you certainly had to be thick-skinned. You had to be able to cop a spray and just kind of move on to the next thing, or have it motivate you to do the next thing. Absolutely. If you shied away from that, you wouldn't last very long. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, I just thought that was interesting because we have Andrew Bogut talks about, because obviously everyone knows his story, and so it didn't make first team. Even under 18s, he was in the second team and then quick rise and got cut from the state team and those sort of things. But rather than being sort of bitter about that, he often talks about in his podcast, he said, so not making teams and stuff, or building some resilience when you're younger can be the best thing
absolutely
that can happen to you. And And yeah, it just resonated with me then when you said, because all those coaches, you know, we've seen on TV many a times, we're going to go hammer and tong at you. But if you recognise that it's just you being held accountable and not, you know, just useless berating, maybe you can make the most of it like you did.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny too. I promised myself when I started coaching that I wouldn't be a yeller and screamer, because it kind of gets old quick sometimes if it's the same message all the time. There's certainly a time and a place for it, but I promised myself I wouldn't do it, and then I found myself doing it, especially my last year at Sabres. I won't go into all that, but it kind of went a little bit pear-shaped, and I found myself yelling and screaming more than I wanted to. I even broke a board in a game one time, just things that you would never imagine me doing as a player. I was so controlled as a player. I think I only ever had, as a player in all my years, I only ever had a kind of a handful of tech fouls even.
Yeah.
But as a coach, all of a sudden I was getting texts and different things because I was struggling with that emotion. It was, for some reason, I could harness it more when I played than when I was sort of standing on the sidelines.
You think that's a control thing? When you're a player, you can influence?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And also, as a player, certainly during games, you know, the next play is happening. And as a coach, yes, but you're still sort of dwelling on something else that might have happened. Whereas as a player, you've already moved on to the next play, or you have to move on to the next play.
Yeah.
So I think I could harness a little bit. But also, coming from a time where, for a lot of my career, I didn't play, especially the early years, I didn't play. You get dragged for tech. So if I get a tech, I'm sit my ass down. So I need to be able to control myself to be able to not step over that line and be able to just say, right, I move on to the next. Otherwise, I'm going to get benched.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic point. Yeah, I mean, that should still probably happen these days, because even if that's not a rule, you're probably still going to be hot-headed, and who knows what can happen the next few plays. Yeah, I'm aware sort of we're running out of time here, but I did want to know, do you still watch the NBL, and if you do, what sort of teams you enjoy watching?
So when I first retired, I probably didn't watch too much. Kind of got away from it a little bit. But the last few years, I've really enjoyed it again. United's been really good at sort of inviting me back occasionally in recent times. So I go along, and I certainly take my kids along and things like that. So I do enjoy watching the games. I watch a lot on the telly these days. I don't get too into it, but I enjoy watching it. Well, I like United. Dean Vickerman was an assistant at my time at the Tigers. Obviously, Barlow's just finished up. He was an ex-teammate. Chris Golding was a teammate on the Gold Coast. So I've enjoyed watching Chris's career really blossom from the time that he left Gold Coast. So United would be the team. I like the Phoenix. I like the two Melbourne teams. I knew Simon Mitchell. Obviously, he's not coaching there now, but he was an assistant with us as well. So I kind of always followed the players, or the coaches, and the people that coached me or had something to do with me. I really struggled with Trevor Gleeson at Perth because I loved Trevor, but I was not a fan of Perth, so that was always a bit of a difficult one, especially when they were so successful. But yeah, no, I do enjoy watching it. The teams.
Or perhaps a player you enjoy watching.
Big fan of Doyle from Jack Jumpers. I got to go to the game the other week and watch, and I said going into the game that he was the one I was most excited to watch. I probably struggled a little bit for three quarters and then just took over in the last quarter. So I love watching him, or guys like him. I still watch Chris, obviously, really keen to see how he goes. There's a bit more turnover these days of players than there was back in my day in terms of getting used to watching certain teams and certain players and different things. But right now, I really enjoyed Doyle. He would be probably the number one that I actually enjoy watching. There's a few players, a few teams. I like the ball movement. The guys that you get too individual, I'm not such a fan. And just the straight on ball and nothing else, I'm not such a fan. But teams that have that real ball movement and the ball moves and players cutting and active, that sort of stuff, I enjoy that style of game.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Look, we'll wrap it up there. Thanks so much for coming on. Been a huge insight in terms of how teams work and how difficult it was in the early days, because I think a lot of us remember your glory days and really enjoyed those. But certainly from the sounds of it now, we can tell it was actually a pretty hard slog. And there were a lot of times when you probably could have just taken your bat and your ball and gone home and not gone with it. So that speaks a lot of you. So thanks again for coming on. I'll put some stuff in the show notes and some stuff in terms of highlights and all those things. People can sort of have a read about. But if you ever go down the road of coaching in the Siebel, maybe we'll get you back. Or not even Siebel now, is it? NBL 1.
NBL 1 now, yeah.
Yeah, we'll get you back on board. Maybe Bulleen will get a team in there. They've sort of dropped off a bit in recent years. In terms of their Big V program, but maybe we could bring that back. But thanks again, and all the best with the future.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the podcast. Make sure to follow us on Instagram for all the updates, upcoming episodes, and previous episodes. Take care and catch you in the next one.